The smoke had been rising for days. At first, it was distant, just a gray smudge on the horizon beyond the Bradshaw Mountains. Locals had grown used to seeing it that time of year. Wildfires were part of life in Arizona. They moved fast, they burned hot, and then they were gone. But this one felt different. On June 28, 2013, lightning struck the dry, rocky hills outside Yarnell, Arizona. It ignited brittle chaparral, dead grass, and dense brush, fuel that hadn't seen significant rainfall in months. The terrain was steep and rugged. The heat climbed into triple digits before noon. And within hours, the blaze, later named the Yarnell Hill Fire, began moving fast. Very fast. By the next morning, it had already tripled in size, and a team of elite wildland firefighters had been called in to stop it. They were known as the Granite Mountain Hotshots. Based out of Prescott, Arizona, they were the only municipal hotshot crew in the country, meaning they weren't federal like most others, but city-run. They trained harder than most, hiked farther than most, and earned their hotshot certification in 2008 after years of proving themselves on fires across the American West. They were highly respected, and they knew what they were doing. Hotshots are the Navy SEALs of firefighting. They're trained to hike into remote wilderness, carrying 40 to 60 pounds of gear, chainsaws, axes, food, shelter, water, radios. They don't just fight fires. They build fire breaks. They cut line. They go where engines and helicopters can't. When others pull back, hotshots go in. And on the morning of June 30th, 2013, 19 of them did just that. There were 20 men on the crew. One, Brendan McDonough, had been assigned as the lookout that day. His job was to stay at a distance and monitor the fire's behavior, alerting the others if conditions changed. The rest of the crew hiked up into the mountains near Yarnell to begin cutting a fire line. By midday, the fire had grown to over 500 acres. The wind was steady, the smoke was heavy, temperatures were spiking, but the men stayed focused. They'd been in worse situations. Then the weather shifted. At around 3:30 p.m., a thunderstorm collapsed north of the fire zone. That collapse pushed a powerful downdraft toward the flames, sending a gust of wind rushing down the canyon at over 30 miles per hour. In firefighting terms, that's a nightmare scenario. Wind changes direction, embers fly, flames whip around hillsides and leap over lines. Fires that were burning laterally suddenly turn and charge downhill. Entire burn patterns shift in minutes, and that's exactly what happened. The fire, which had been burning away from the crew, suddenly pivoted. It turned south, toward Yarnell, and toward the Granite Mountain Hotshots. They saw the change. They knew the danger. They tried to move. At first, radio transmissions seemed routine. The crew was relocating, trying to reach a safety zone. They were experienced, disciplined, and not prone to panic. But by the time the severity of the wind shift was fully realized, it was too late. They were boxed in. Dense brush and steep terrain slowed their progress. Visibility dropped. The air filled with choking smoke and blowing ash. The fire roared through the chaparral like a freight train, pushed by wind gusts that made it unstoppable. McDonough, the lookout, had already been evacuated. From his position, he couldn't see his crew. He could only hear fragments over the radio. Static, strained voices, requests for air support, calls to deploy shelters, then silence. At 4:42 p.m., a helicopter pilot flying overhead spotted a deployment site. It was a blackened clearing near a cattle fence, charred earth surrounded by still-burning brush. And inside it were the bodies, 19 men. Their emergency fire shelters, small reflective pods designed to deflect radiant heat, had been deployed too late to make a difference. The fire had burned at over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no chance of survival. They were found in tight formation, close together. Some had managed to get into their shelters. Others were halfway in. Their gear was scattered. Chainsaws melted. Helmets scorched. Radios fused into ash. In less than 2 minutes, One of the best-trained firefighting crews in the world had been wiped out. News of their deaths spread fast. Prescott, a tight-knit mountain town of 40,000, was shattered. Everyone knew someone. Wives, parents, brothers, friends. The fire department lowered its flags. Local churches filled with mourners. Streets were lined with candles, letters, boots, and photos. The town's heart had been torn out. It was the deadliest wildfire event for firefighters in the U.S. since September 11th. And it raised questions that no one wanted to ask. How did it happen? Why did they leave the black, the already burned safer zone? Were there communication failures? Did leadership pressure them to protect structures in Yarnell? Were air resources mismanaged? An investigation began immediately. The official report, released later that year, concluded that the crew had moved from their safe zone in an attempt to reach another clearing, possibly believing it offered better protection or a faster exit route. The fire's sudden wind shift had cut them off. Communication with other crews and air units had been limited by poor reception and terrain. No single decision was blamed. But the pain lingered. Some families rejected the findings. Others demanded accountability. Prescott Fire Department grieved publicly. Services were held at an arena, attended by thousands, including then Vice President Joe Biden. The fallen were honored with full firefighter rights. Their names were etched in granite, their stories told again and again. The tragedy forced changes across the industry. New standards were proposed for communication, training, and escape route planning, GPS tracking for crews, better integration of air and ground units, more autonomy for lookouts. But for those who knew the men, no reform could bring them back. They were young, most in their 20s and 30s. They loved what they did. They trained hard. They hiked daily. They ate meals together in fire camps and joked over long drives between assignments. They were husbands, sons, friends. They had nicknames like Turby, Mac, Panda, and Juicebox. They were led by Eric Marsh, a seasoned hotshot and former smoke jumper who believed in his crew with everything he had. His second-in-command, Jesse Steed, was a Marine veteran and father of 2. They died doing what they believed in, trying to hold the line, trying to protect a town. The Yarnell Hill fire would go on to destroy more than 100 homes before it was fully contained. But what it destroyed most deeply wasn't physical. It was trust, confidence, and the unspoken belief that the best-trained crews would always come home. Today, there's a memorial trail in the mountains outside Yarnell. It follows the route the Granite Mountain Hotshots took that day. It leads through rugged, sun-baked terrain, up steep inclines, past scorched earth, and finally to the fatal deployment site, where 19 steel crosses now stand in the dust. Each one marks where a man fell. Each one tells a piece of a story that ended too soon. Visitors leave patches, helmets, flowers, notes. Some cry, some pray, some just stare into the quiet desert and try to understand how 19 of the best could be gone in an instant. But there is no satisfying answer. The fire didn't care how good they were. It moved fast. It turned suddenly, and by the time they saw it, it was already too late. They did everything right, until the fire did everything wrong. And even now, a decade later, their loss burns like the hills they once tried to save. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.